On Monday, September 6, 2021. That will be 4 weeks this coming Monday. After a blessed weekend in the highlands of Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, we were driving down to the south coast, to the coast of the Halifax area, and we decided to make a stop. We stopped like half an hour of Antigonish. For those who know the place, there's something called Cape Hope. Cape Hope is a National Heritage Site. It's the lighthouse of one of the many in Nova Scotia and in Canada. There you have the Northumberland Strait, and beyond the strait is PEI. So we were there. The weather was Scottish weather, as you can see. And as we were there, we saw by the lighthouse a bench. And in the bench, there was a plaque. And we, with Aiden, went closer, and I read what the plaque said. The plaque says, "In loving memory of Patrick John Pat Mcdonald, fisherman, mentor, and friend. Please enjoy the view as much as he did. Love, his brother Irvin, Karen and family, Yvette, niece Sarah Jane, and nephew Charles." Now, when I read that, the reporter in me suddenly kicked in, and I felt a desire to know more about Pat Mcdonald. Who was this man? Was he an important philanthropist? Was he a well-known politician? Why does he deserve a memorial at that place? And then I decided to find out. So who was Pat Mcdonald? If you expect breaking news, an extraordinary story, you will be disappointed. I did my research, and news in Nova Scotia had reported that on the evening of January 22nd, 2018, local fisherman Pat Mcdonald's truck had been found on the wharf of nearby Ballantyne's Cove. Police said his truck had been last seen around 2:30 p.m. the day before, but nobody was able to provide more details. For months, there was no news of Pat Mcdonald until one day a local fisherman found some human remains some 18 kilometers from the shore. The RCMP confirmed the remains were Pat's. At the time, the RCMP said they would investigate, but as far as I know, the results of that investigation were never made public. At least I could not find any report available. So what happened to Pat? Well, there are treacherous waves against the rocks of Ballantyne's Cove. Did he faint or fall? Did he have a heart attack? Was he pulled into the undertow on that bleak winter afternoon? As far as I know, nobody can tell for sure what happened to Pat. But who was Pat? I tried to put the puzzle together. Pat Mcdonald was a local resident who had worked as a welder in his early years. However, for the past 20 years, he had done what he loved most, to fish and catch lobster. Pat had been the captain of a fishing boat, and people say he could be found on the wharf any time of the day working on his boat and getting things ready for lobster catching. On the off-season, he fished with his good friend Archie and built lobster traps. Pat was always willing to lend a helping hand to anyone in need. His smile and laugh brought joy to many. Although a quiet and private man, Pat had many close friends. His friends said you could always count on Pat. He was a simple, hard-working man who fulfilled his duties faithfully, someone who left a positive legacy on those who happened to know him. Now, what is a legacy? What is a legacy? At the end of the last Canadian election, I listened to the comments of a CBC political analyst who said, since this will probably be his last period, the Prime Minister should focus on legacy issues. Those things you want to be remembered by. So legacy is what you leave for others. It is what you do not and cannot take with you. It's not what you take, it's what you leave. You know, last Sunday, we said, well, we didn't say goodbye to Brother Vince. We said, see you soon. And, you know, several of you were here sharing some aspect of his legacy, which I think is embedded in this building and in our memories. If you ask me, I think Vince left a trail of light on this local congregation and our wider church community. That is a legacy. And I want to share with you today, as briefly as possible, 5 items related to legacies that we would do very well in remembering. Number one, you cannot choose whether to leave a legacy. You can only choose what legacy to leave. In the verse that I chose for today, and you have it in the first slide, it's Genesis, if you want to read it now, Genesis 18. In Genesis 18, verses 17 to 19, Genesis 18, 17 to 19, it talks about Abraham's legacy, a legacy of faithfulness to God, of responsibility toward his offspring. Abraham was a mentor of a new generation of leaders for God's church. And the verse says, verse 17 of Genesis 18, and the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. Some other version says, I know that this man will command his children and his household to keep the way of the Lord. I know this man, God said. I know him. I know what he will do. I know that he will keep the flame alive. Let me share this statement. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 142. It says that Abraham's own example, the silent influence of his daily life, was a constant lesson. The unswerving integrity, the benevolence, and unselfish courtesy which had won the admiration of kings were displayed in the home. There was a fragrance about the life and nobility and loveliness of character which revealed to all that he was connected with heaven. And the bold is mine. Revealed to all at home and with kings and princes that he was connected to heaven. On the other hand, we have Lot's legacy. A legacy of selfishness, of just looking after your own well-being. A legacy of compromise, of tinkering with the values of the world. A legacy of an incestuous offspring that lived on to fight God's people for centuries. Now it is for you and for me to decide, who do you want to be, Abraham or Lot? We must make a decision. Number 2, unless you work in partnership with God, you may end up damaging your legacy. Remember King Hezekiah, 2 Kings 20? Hezekiah got sick. Bible scholars say that he was not even 40 when he got sick. And God said, you're going to die. Very hard. And then he cried to the Lord, and the Lord answered his prayer. But then the Babylonian envoys arrived to visit when he was well. And what did he do? He told prophet Isaiah, 2 Kings 20:15, they have seen all that is in my house. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not shown them. Your treasures? Are you kidding? Those are not your treasures, are God's. And he forgot it, and he ruined his legacy because he lost his connection with God, and his legacy was tainted. So only our constant connection with God and his will can keep our legacy from becoming a curse instead of a blessing. Number 3, even if you are with God, you must fight for your legacy. And this is something important for all of us who believe in God's will. Because, sometimes we blame God for many events, many developments to God's will, when actually it is our fault. It is our lack of action, our procrastination, our laziness, our bad choices. And we say, well, it's God's will. Well, many times it is not God's will. We must be conscious and fight for a legacy. If you go down the road, 416 and 180, don't say it's God's will if you end up under a bridge or, best case scenario, with the police. It is not God's will. You have to fight. And there's a wonderful example that I would like to share very briefly about a man whose name is difficult to pronounce in any language. Believe me. Numbers 27. Zelophehad or something like that. Well, the meaning of his name was dark shadow or in the shadow. So let me call him, for expedience's sake, dark shadow. The story of dark shadow and his 5 daughters, who he died, and then the 5 daughters went to Moses and said, Numbers 27:4, why should the name of our father be removed from among his family because he had no son? Give us possession among our father's brothers. So Moses brought their case before the Lord. And the Lord spoke to Moses and said, the daughters of dark shadow speak what is right. You shall surely give them a possession of inheritance among their father's brothers and cause the inheritance of their father to pass to them. Now, let this sink in. A group of young ladies perceive what they think it's an injustice. They present their case advocating for a change. They were activists. And we have a problem sometimes with that word, and I understand it. Now, the leader is not convinced, so he goes and he does the right thing. He talks to God and asks God, what should I do? And God says, the Lord and Master of the universe tells Moses, do what they say. So God is willing to change course and follow the lead of a group of young ladies, not only in that specific case, but from then on, because that set, jurisprudence for the future. Can you wrap your mind about it? What statement is God trying to make? We need to go to him and ask for what we think is right and fight and advocate for what we think is right, so our legacy can be an active enterprise and not just passive. We must fight for a family and a church family that when we leave will be better than it was when we first arrived. Number 4, legacy is not only what you do, legacy is what you are. And there's an active and a passive phase or stage here. The active, we know it, many of us by heart. Deuteronomy 6, we're going to study about it in the coming couple of weeks. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. So thank God for Christian faithful parents who fulfill their God-given duty to the best of their abilities. There is no transmission of faith without intentionality. Things just do not happen by default. We must do our job. This church has to do our job, to train, to teach, to disciple. But then there's the passive aspect also. And let me read one more statement. Wonderful. Look at this. Listen to this. Child Guidance 2:16. Your example will do more than can be accomplished by any other means. Your conversation, the way in which you manage your business matters. The likes and dislikes to which you give expression all help in molding the character. The kindly disposition, the self-control, the self-possession, the courtesy your child sees in you will be daily lessons to him. Wow. Now, you could say, well, I don't have kids of my own, or, well, my kids are grown-ups, they made their decisions, they have left eons ago. Let me be clear. This duty goes well beyond biological or even adopted children. This is about leadership, about mentorship, about being examples the next generation can look up to and follow. You, each one of you, have a lot of power in your hands. Never underestimate the power of the influence you can have on a young and an experienced member of this church. There's a lot all of you and each one of you can do. Finally, number 5. Leaving a worthy legacy is not free. There is a price to pay. Leaving a legacy costs money, time, and effort. It implies going out of our comfort zone. It implies bending over backwards for the common good, even against your personal best judgment. And I want to say today, give my personal testimony, because when we arrived with a baby more than 12 years ago to this church, we were embraced by this church. And I have said it before. Especially during our first year, there were people who clearly went out of their comfort zone to make us feel welcome. Now, some of them are here this morning. I see them. Some of them are perhaps watching from home because they have grown older and frail, or are just making the best they can not to get sick. Some of them are already sleeping in Christ, waiting for resurrection morning. Now, we have a collection of positive experiences as a family, and I want to share one, not as a family so much, but in my job, in the time that I was closer to you in this church. I want to share an experience that perhaps you don't know or remember. And I want to talk about, for a minute, about Sister Joan Brewer. Remember Sister Joan? Many of you worked with her, ate with her, argued with her. Joan was one of a kind. And some years ago, we became very good friends. We would talk quite a bit. Some years ago, we were renting this sanctuary to a Christian group on Sundays. Now, some NPN members who had stopped by the church on Sunday expressed some concern at the church board about the type of worship being conducted by that group. Now, since we seem to be in a gridlock about what to do, I offered to attend one of these groups' worship services and report back to the board before we voted on what to do. Now, Sister Joan raised her hand and said, "I'm going to go with you." And I said, "Well, you're welcome. Let's go together." 4 eyes, 4 ears, better than 2. So when the day came, I stopped by her place. She had already stopped driving for the most part. I picked her up, and there we went. We came actually to this sanctuary to attend the service of our Christian brethren. Now, we were the oddest of couples, the old and old-fashioned British lady and the younger immigrant pastor, both clearly standing out in a group of mostly African-born members. We were sitting there, in that corner. And, the service was, in my opinion, long, loud, and repetitive. I appreciated the members' zeal, but I had a hard time relating to that kind of worship. I looked at Sister Joan. She was covering her ears. I knew that she routinely complained about that I spoke too loud when I preached here in EP, and so I knew she must be suffering. Somehow we soldiered on to the end. On our drive back, we had some time for debriefing. And before I listened to her, I knew exactly what she was thinking. She didn't want anything to do with these people. That kind of worship in her mind was utterly offensive to her British ears. Now, I also felt that such a service was too much for my liking or idea of worshiping God. Even if I tried, I couldn't relate. I didn't feel comfortable at all. But at the same time, I acknowledged that whatever my thoughts were about the type of worship, we couldn't use that as a reason to cancel their contract or make a big fuss about it. So the day finally arrived for us to report back to the church board. First, it was my turn to speak. Once more, I said that I couldn't relate to that type of worship. It was too noisy for my liking. But, I added, I don't see how we can use this against them, even if we do not agree with the way they sing and preach and pray. As I spoke, I looked at Joan sideways. I could tell that my words were giving her a lot of pain. I could tell she was suffering. And yet, when the time came for her to speak, she said she supported my report and that she agreed with me thoroughly. She repeated my words. For the time being, the issue was settled, and at that time we voted the group to stay. Every time I am at a church board and listen to an opinion that I find contrary to my deeply held convictions or ideas, I remember Sister Joan, the old British lady willing to bend over backwards for the greater good of the church she loved. So the key question that each of us, have to ask is, what price are we willing to pay? And let me finish with a story that was in the news a few days ago. It's a story of Robbie and Susan Walker from Florida. 52-year-old Robbie Walker got COVID-19 in July this year, and just a few days later had to be hospitalized. His wife, Susan, shared that COVID infections spread like wildfire among her unvaccinated extended family after a 4th of July gathering. By July 25, Robbie consented to being intubated on a ventilator. He was crying. He was regretful for not taking precautions. There was nothing they could do. Susan told CNN in early August that her husband was in dire need of ECMO. For those who know, it's something like extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, ECMO, some extra oxygen treatment. But all the beds in nearby hospitals in Florida were taken by COVID patients also getting treated. Susan said that when doctors informed her it was unlikely Robbie would survive, she didn't accept it and went on a mission to find a hospital that had room for ECMO treatment. She called one hospital to no avail. She called a second one and a third. She called a dozen hospitals. She called scores of hospitals. No luck. In August, she told CNN that she has searched every hospital from the south of Florida to the north part of Florida. She kept track. And soon she and family members had unsuccessfully reached out to 169 hospitals. But when Susan shared her plea for her life-saving treatment for her dying husband on CNN, a Connecticut doctor named Robert Gallagher saw the broadcast on Facebook and wanted to help. I just clicked on it and watched it, and it was pretty compelling, he said, the outlet. While still intubated, Robbie was flown on a medical flight from Florida more than 1,000 miles north to Hospital 170 in Connecticut. Susan said of the transport, if I would have not taken the chance, they just would have had no choice but to leave him there and have his organs fail one by one. After 22 days, Robbie was removed from a ECMO treatment on September the 2nd, CNN reported. He lost nearly 50 pounds during his hospitalization and has begun physical therapy. Robbie told CNN a few days ago that he couldn't be prouder of his wife, calling her my hero for saving his life. And for Susan, well, the life of her husband is simply priceless, she said, and she was willing to do all in her power so he could stay alive and regain health. So the question is, what price are we willing to pay? How much is a young person in this church worth? How much for a discouraged senior? How much for a fledgling new believer? How much for a lukewarm old-timer? How much for a struggling pastor? And I'm not implying that Pastor Bob is struggling. You know, I have a friend who in every baptism he leads, he says, remember, this is not a graduation, this is a birth. So when you have a baby that starts walking and falls, you don't kick him, you don't punish him. You say, let me help you, try again. And this is what we have to do. Our families, our church need to be Hospital 170. That should be our legacy. And I want to finish here with a reminder. And this church is doing a wonderful job, I think, with young people. And that costs a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of money. You know, I don't know about the North American division, but in some other divisions, especially the ones who have a very strong youth and Pathfinder program, they have found, they have the data from surveys, that young adults and adults say, who are in the church, who are active members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, up to 7 out of 10, listen to this, up to 7 out of 10 can trace Pathfinders, the Pathfinders program, as a major influence in their lives. In other words, from those active members, adults in church, nowadays, in some regions of the world, church, only 3 do not mention, out of 10, do not mention Pathfinders as a powerful influence for staying and becoming active in church. So, I want you to remember that. We need programs like that. We need programs that focus on our legacy, on preparing a generation for the challenges that we have no idea about yet. Oh, but you know, young people, they are distracted, they are not focused. You know what? God will finish the work with them. So we have to do our part. God will do the rest. To support them, to pray for them, to be patient, to build a legacy, a new generation of leaders who will go on when we are not able to. Let me finish with, this is an American writer, Maya Angelou. She said, your legacy is every life you have ever touched. Every time you connect, every time you talk, every time you interact with someone, you're giving and leaving a legacy. Let's hope and let's pray with God's help to make the most of it, to prepare and leave the best legacy according to God's will, and to stay strong together, young and old, to see Jesus very soon. Thank you.